Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Kristen Flynn, and I am the Executive Director of Student Learning Services. We're really excited to have you participate today in our Count Day Reporting for Virtual Learners webinar. My team currently oversees the course development and hiring of certified teachers for over 250 middle and high school online courses. We serve about 30,000 students annually. Just a little quick background. I have previously served as a high school English teacher and administrator at the elementary, middle, high school, and central office levels for the last 22 years prior to coming to Michigan Virtual 5 years ago. We're excited to have you here and hope that you get a lot of value out of today's session. Michigan Virtual is a nonprofit. We are excited to have celebrated our 20th year in 2018 with over 250,000 enrollments. Since we started. We believe in advancing K-12 digital learning and teaching through research, practice, and partnerships, and we truly believe that every person can use digital learning to help reach his or her full potential. Our purpose today is to gain an understanding of what is required for reporting virtual learners on Count Day, and really to discuss some legislative and audit requirements, share best practices, and provide resources that can assist you through this process. Just a few housekeeping items for today. By default, everyone is on mute. We want you to have an awesome webinar experience. So if you do have questions, you can type them into the chat box window. We will address those questions at the end of the session. We do have people monitoring that throughout. The chat option is at the bottom of the Zoom webinar screen. So to chat, simply click the chat icon and you can begin typing. And if we get a break during or there's relevant questions, we will try to answer them as we go. Otherwise, we will have them at the end. And if for some reason we have just way more questions than we have time for, we will make sure that we get a frequently asked questions site out or answers to that when we send the recording of this webinar, which the last point, this meeting is, or this webinar, excuse me, is being recorded. So that webinar link will be available for folks afterwards if you'd like to go back or share it with other people. With that, I'd like to begin to introduce our guest. Debbie Lynch is our Mentor Outreach Coordinator, and Debbie, prior to coming to Michigan Virtual, taught in the education space for over 3 decades, was also an online mentor and has been an online teacher for Michigan Virtual. And I will turn it over to Debbie to introduce herself.
Thanks, Kristen. I joined Michigan Virtual in January of 2010 as a part-time instructor. And as Kristen said, I was a mentor for 8 years for students taking online classes at my local high school. I did teach business and technology for 33 years. I joined Michigan Virtual full-time in June 2017 as the Mentor Outreach Coordinator. I really enjoy having the opportunity to visit schools and support mentors around the state of Michigan.
Thanks, Debbie. We're also really excited to have a couple of folks with us from the Department of Ed. Brian Ciloski is a specialist with MDE in the Office of Financial Management. He received a Bachelor of Science from CMU in Public Administration and began his career in state government in 1999 with the Department of State, working with campaign finance in the voter registration information system. In 2008, he began his career with the Department of Ed, managing the administration and reporting aspects of the English language proficiency assessment and the Michigan merit exam. In 2011, he accepted his current position where he oversees the financial and administrative activities that are associated with pupil accounting. Thank you, Brian, for taking time out today to be with us. I also want to introduce Jessica. Jessica is a financial analyst with the Office of Financial Management, State Aid, and School Finance Unit. She's experienced with pupil accounting matters and serves as a point of contact for travel waivers, forgiven day waivers, 23A claims and calculations, and days and clock hour questions. She also serves as the state expert for district indirect cost rates and questions related to MDE calculated rates. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to the both of them to talk a little bit more about virtual instruction requirements. Thanks to both of you for being here.
Thank you, Kristen, and good morning, everyone. My name's Jessica, and we are very happy to be here with you today. Brian and I are just going to go over and give a brief synopsis of who may enroll in virtual courses and what the requirements for virtual instruction are from a state aid standpoint. And then we're gonna, of course, open it up for questions. So let's get started. Virtual learning is open to all grades, kindergarten through 12th grade. For kindergarten through 5th grade, enrollment in a virtual course is optional, meaning that a district has the option to allow enrollment or not for students in the earlier grades. For grades 6 through 12, a district must allow an eligible student to enroll in up to 2 virtual courses. Enrollment beyond those 2 courses may be supported by the district if it's deemed to be in the best interest of the student. For virtual enrollment, it's not required for a student to also be enrolled in a concurrent course. I believe this requirement was nixed a few years ago, about the time that I started with the department, which was about 4 years ago. So we're going to take a quick look at some of the requirements for the district to receive funding for these types of offerings. First of all, in order to receive funding for a student must be a resident of Michigan. We're often asked, well, what if my student is taking a course and they need to leave the state? And our response is that a student can temporarily leave the state as long as the parent maintains residency and the student intends to return to the state. The great thing about virtual learning is that the courses can be attempted anywhere. So even if a student needs to leave the state, they can often continue on with their coursework through their virtual learning. Virtual learning has an attendance component, but it's a little bit different than what we think of in the traditional environment. We refer to it as participation. One of the participation requirements must be met. Some are required to be met on count day, while others span over the count period. There will be a little bit more on the participation requirement in future slides. And it's important to note that a district must obtain the consent of a parent for the student to participate in virtual courses. And consent only needs to be captured one time. Occasionally, you'll hear about a student who leaves a district and they then return to the district at a later date. At that point, the district would want to capture the consent again. So it's basically one time for each enrollment. The virtual course must be published in the district's course catalog of board-approved courses and displayed in a prominent location on the district's website. Or the course must be in the statewide catalog that's maintained by Michigan Virtual, to which the district must provide a publicly accessible link. We recommend linking to the catalog from the district's main page as a best practice. The actual course name must appear on the student's schedule and must be recorded on the transcript. When auditors do a review of the district, they will look at the student's schedule and they want to see the actual name of the course and not a placeholder that says something like online course. The auditor will also request evidence that the student has been enrolled or registered for each course and that the course is paid for. We can only count a course in membership or for funding purposes if the course generates credit or is used for grade progression. And just for reference, when we use the term membership, this is referring to the full-time equated number of pupils enrolled and in regular daily attendance on count day. Every virtual student needs a mentor. As the mentor, you need to be a professional employee of the district. As the mentor, you are the student's lifeline if there's a problem with the course, and this comes in in your two-way communications that we talk about later on. In addition to the mentor, there must be a teacher of record assigned to each course. The teacher of record must be appropriately certified in Michigan, and the mentor may also be the teacher of record. Unless the student is a 166B student, meaning a homeschooled student or a non-public student taking classes at the public school, an EDP must be on file for each student who is taking more than 2 virtual courses. An EDP is a tool that the district will use to identify how to best serve the learner. The EDP need not be complete at the start of the school year, as most districts consider it a living document that will change throughout the course of the student's education. If a virtual course is also offered in the district's traditional environment, then the amount of FTE generated by the virtual course could be the same as the course that's offered in the traditional environment, unless the virtual course offers less content. In that case, the FTE is based on the amount of content contained in that course. Each course must also have a syllabus that provides the virtual course content outline for students. Having this content broken out for each week of the semester with expected hours to complete each content item will help the auditors verify the instructional hours for the course. And this is how the course it generates the FTE. This is how we do the calculation.
All right, we do have a couple questions coming across, Jessica and Brian. Debbie, let me grab this question. It's basically, the question is that if a student is enrolled in a school district, okay, if a student, do parents have to complete a specific form for online courses if they're already enrolled in a school?
I believe districts have created a form or a way to capture the parent's consent if it wasn't done at the time of enrollment, but a lot of districts are moving to having that on the enrollment form when students come into the district. And Brian, feel free to chime in if I missed anything.
No, that's perfect. I do also know that some districts have created an electronic form to capture the parental consent. So it could take whatever form the district deems appropriate.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so on to the portion that a lot of mentors are very familiar with, the participation requirement, and I'm going to talk about Route 1 is how we refer to it, and Brian will then discuss the Route 2 participation requirements. But I'm sure that you're all familiar with two-way communication. It's been around the longest, it's most widely used, and it's also used as a safeguard or a backup in case one of the other participation requirements are used but aren't fully completed. So two-way interactions must occur between the pupil and the teacher of record or the mentor. The two-way interaction is intended to be individualized in nature. The teacher of record or mentor must maintain an activity log for each pupil documenting the two-way interaction. Two-way interactions come in many forms. So you're talking text messages, emails, documentation of phone conversations, documentation of face-to-face conversations, instant messaging, discussion board exchanges, etc. As a mentor, if you have students who are in the classroom regularly, for example, they attend school all day and they're in a classroom every day for their virtual course, you may also document their, what we refer to as physical presence as the two-way communication for the 4-week count period. This shouldn't be confused as taking attendance by the teacher of record, as the teacher of record is the only person who can take attendance in the classroom. You must have at least one documented two-way interaction for one class for each week of the count period. The teacher of record or mentor may print email exchanges and discussion board conversations, or they may take notes from a telephone or face-to-face conversation that includes details of the conversation and the date. If the exchange occurs by text messages, some auditors will require those messages to be downloaded for record keeping purposes. So you'll want to be aware of that if you're using that sort of exchange. A district often wants to use a mass email exchange to initiate two-way communication. We've mentioned that two-way communication is meant to be individualized, so a district could use the mass communication to begin the two-way interaction, but the teacher of record or the mentor must follow up to close the loop, as we say. So it may look something like a district sends a mass communication, the pupil responds to the communication, and then the teacher of record or the mentor then responds to the pupil, and that's how we close the loop. So we've talked about two-way interaction, and it should be academic in nature, either by discussing a virtual course on the pupil's schedule or the course content or the progress of the student's course and how it's going. It's been brought to my attention that sometimes mentors don't know what the course content is, so you can always use conversation about how things are going, what's going well for you in the course. Can you tell me about something that's happening in the course? Can you tell me about something that you're struggling with? So that that interaction is also pertaining to the course that the student is taking virtually.
Jessica?
Yes.
When I was a mentor several years ago, we were able to, I was a certified teacher and the kids would come to my class to take their online class, and I was able to take attendance. So I think some people are confused that this law changed a few years ago. So that, and I know you're explaining this and I can see the chat popping up with questions. So I just wanted to know if you could explain that, you know, that isn't, that you can't use attendance to capture your participation requirement anymore. Depending on, but I know depending on the vendor usage, you have to be the teacher of record. Mm-hmm. Am I correct to say that you're the teacher of record to be able to take the attendance? If you're not the teacher of record, this is what changed a few years ago. And I think people are confused about that.
Right. So if you're not the teacher of record, but you still have kids coming into the classroom, we're not saying you can take attendance. What we're saying is you can document that that student was physically present in the classroom with you, because in our eyes, that's probably the most significant interaction you can have, is when you see a student face to face and you're going to interact with them and have conversations with them about what's going on. And then we just ask that you document that interaction, or that the student was in attendance, so you could take that attendance log. I know that some districts keep an attendance log, have kids signing in or whatever, and use that as part of your two-way interaction. All right, does that help?
Yeah, and we do have some additional questions here in the chat window, so I'm going to turn it over to my chat window monitor, who's kind of filtering through ones that have already been answered and ones that still are needing to be answered. Go ahead.
So this question is in regards to have a syllabus out the content by time. The question is, will there be a grace period for allowing time to get these syllabi added? Is it sufficient that the vendor indicates the length that is design of the course being designed for a semester, year, or quarter? And does it have to list what is expected each day?
So for us, this is kind of just a guideline to help with determining the amount of class time or FTE that students are receiving. So if the class is already offered in a traditional format, you have something that you can compare it to. When the class isn't offered in a traditional format, then we have to figure out, well, how do we know that this class is going to expand the entire semester, so we can offer the same amount of FTE for it. So it's a guideline from us, and we hope that it's a useful tool for districts to help make that determination. Brian, do you want to add something?
Sure. What I can add is that the requirement to have a syllabus is actually a statutory requirement.
Yeah.
So there really isn't, we can't tell you that you don't need this. The amount of detail that has is something that the district does have control of. But what I'll add is, and this is going along with what Jessica was explaining, the more detail that you can provide through that syllabus about, you know, the instruction that's going to occur, the better. So your auditor is going to be more satisfied with something that shows how the content is going to be paced out. I wouldn't say that you need to have that at like a daily level. You could have something that simply explains that you know, each week is going to have such and such content, and that you expect that week or the amount of instruction to be contained within that week to be 10 hours or whatever it may be. So that would be, you know, what I would be aiming for as a district.
Did we have more questions?
We do have more questions. They're kind of vetting through them, so we'll move on to the next slide while they're vetting those.
Okay, I have a little bit more on this slide, and then Brian will take over, I believe. So just a little bit more about the two-way. The two-way interactions should provide both the teacher of record or the mentor and the pupil a better understanding of the pupil's experience and the progress, and should provide a forum for any other course-related needs that need to be resolved for the pupil to complete the course successfully. The communication could always include just asking how they're doing and what their struggles are. For the purposes of, for membership purposes, two-way begins on count day and ends the following Tuesday during each week of the count period. And I know we've had questions about the format that the two-way logs should take, and we always, of course, recommend working with the district's ISD auditor to determine what format's going to be acceptable and what they're looking for. We work with the Michigan Pupil Accounting and Attendance Association, MPAAA. They have a form listed on their website that is accessible by anyone. Some ISDs have forms on their website, the forms that they typically use. And the Pupil Accounting Manual has another example of a form that's used out in the field that can be used by anyone and taken and shaped and molded to fit your purposes. And with that, I will turn it over to Brian to talk about Route 2 options.
All right, thank you, Jessica. So before we get moving on, I think it's probably pertinent to mention that you will want to keep documentation of your two-way interactions or students' participation for at least one school year back. That's as far back as the auditors can go at this point in time. So if your district is audited and you aren't able to produce the documentation to back up your two-way, your district is going to lose membership likely. So do keep a backup of your two-way interaction records and participation records for at least 1 year, you know, prior to the current school year. Now on to Route 2. We call it Route 2 just by default because we were doing two-way interactions first, and then we took the concepts that were being used for cyber schools to a work group and asked, you know, if any of those should be adopted for virtual environments, and they came up with with this plan. And essentially, Route 2 is the student simulating what would normally happen in a traditional environment by attending each of the scheduled courses on count day itself. And by attending, we would want to see the student complete an activity or an assignment in each of the scheduled courses on that student schedule for count day. Move on to the next slide. It'll show a bit more detail about what those things may be. So the first is if obviously the student is in attendance with a live lesson, and that teacher of record takes or captures that attendance of each of the students, that is going to serve as participation or proof of participation in the course on count day. The completion of a course assignment or lesson or activity can also serve to complete this count day requirement. Physical attendance on count day. So this only applies to situations where the student is going to be face-to-face, physically in attendance, scheduled to be in attendance, so it's not optional, for that course at least 50% of the time. And if that is the case, then that teacher of record can take attendance, and that will serve to fulfill this requirement. The last option is documented access to a lesson. And to explain this a little bit further, it's not a login. It simply is, the lesson is going to take more time than what a student would have to complete that assignment in a single day. But the district can demonstrate that the student completed a significant amount of the course on that day. Sequential learners. I don't know if any of your districts are doing this, but it's becoming a more prevalent form of delivering courses to students. And sequential means essentially that the student is going to complete one of their scheduled courses or two of their scheduled courses at a time, and then once that course is completed, they will move on to the next course. If you're doing sequential, you only need to fulfill the participation requirement for the course that is expected to be being attempted during the count period. So if it's just one course, then you would show a completed assignment in that one course on count day, or two-way interactions throughout the entire count period for the student for that one course. If you're going to do sequential, you do need to have an EDP for the student. The EDP should show when the student is going to attempt each of the courses. The student's schedule must have all of the courses that the student will be attempting during that semester. And then the auditor is going to ask for proof that the student is registered for each of the courses and that the courses are paid for.
Brian, we do have a question from some previous comments. Does the teacher of record have to be highly qualified in the subject area or just grade level?
So highly qualified doesn't exist anymore, but to us, it essentially means that the teacher of record is properly endorsed in the subject area. For membership purposes, the auditors first look to verify that the teacher is Michigan certified for the grade level being taught. If the auditor sees that or believes that the teacher may be inappropriately placed for the course that's being taught, then that auditor will turn that over to OEE, which is our certification office, to investigate further. And typically, they'll contact the district and say, okay, tell me exactly how you're meeting the endorsement requirements for this course. Perhaps the district has a teacher that's assigned that's appropriate for the grade level, and a second teacher who is co-teaching the course, who is going to provide the student with any assistance that's pertinent or relevant to the subject being taught. So between those two teachers, the certification requirement for the grade level and the subject area are being met. And if that's the case, then no deductions are going to occur.
All right, Brian, we have another question from the chat window.
If a student has a full course schedule of traditional classes and takes an online class in addition to a full schedule, does it have to appear on the student's schedule? And would we need to meet the count requirements for that online course?
So this is a great question. I do think it comes up quite a bit, especially for kids that are trying to get a little bit ahead in their educational career and or making up courses that perhaps they didn't receive credit on before. And the answer is no. That would be the same as a student taking a course during the summertime. It's not generating any state aid. It's likely that the student has paid their own tuition to attend this class. So no, you do not have to meet the participation requirements if that's the case, if the class is not being counted for membership.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we did cover this pretty well. The only thing that I want to clarify is that when we're talking about those attempt dates, it's a pretty simple timeline of a projected start and end date for each of the courses. So, and it is projected. So obviously, if a student finishes a course sooner or later, then you just modify the EDP to fit that student's progress. All right, so Jessica did speak to the physical presence piece a little bit earlier, but just to kind of hammer it home, if a student is obviously going to be with their teacher of record for at least 50% of the time, that teacher of record can take attendance to meet the participation requirement. If the student is simply going to be present, but isn't scheduled to be physically in attendance, so the district has provided the student with the option of coming into their computer lab to complete their assignments, but they could do them at home. If that student is physically present with either the teacher of record or mentor, that is going to be captured as part of the activity log and would satisfy one of the two-way interaction requirements for that week. So you could capture physical presence as a means to meet the participation requirement for the 4 weeks during the count period.
Great. Thank you, Brian and Jessica. Really appreciate your overview of the virtual learning requirements. We do have some questions that Debbie has captured from the field in talking to mentors. And so I think these are, again, what mentors want to know. What are really the key things that they need to know as they begin the school year and start reporting their online learners?
So obviously the key things are to ensure that you're capturing two-way interactions, if that is what you're going to be using to meet the participation requirement, in a form and manner that is going to satisfy your ISD auditor. So if you're unsure if what you're doing is going to meet their requirement, you can reach out to the ISD auditor and just say, this is what we're doing. Is this going to satisfy you when you conduct your audit? They'll help anyone that is involved with a course. So even as a mentor or a teacher of record, you should feel free to contact that ISD auditor for advice on how to capture these things appropriately. Do make sure that you're backing up your communications. We had a district that had one of their mentors capturing two-way on their mobile device, and that mobile device died, and they lost all of their two-way interaction records. So we would suggest you back that up as often as possible, and do keep those records for at least a year beyond the school year that you're currently having.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So where's the best place for mentors to get up-to-date forms for reporting online learners?
So I believe that Jessica did point to the MPAAA. They're a great place to start. I would first maybe go to your ISD auditor and say, what forms do you want me to use to capture two-way? And if they aren't specific, we do have an example in the appendix of the Pupil Accounting Manual of how we would recommend capturing two-way interactions, and it does even provide some examples of what those communications might look like. So those are the 3 resources that we would recommend.
Great, thanks. Well, Brian, seeing that the 1920 Pupil Accounting Manual is not yet out, how should mentors proceed reporting their online learners, which count days next week? So what's your advice to them there?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I wish it was the only time that this has ever happened, but it has happened in the past. Our legislator has yet to provide us with updated legislation for this year. What we've seen so far doesn't indicate that there are going to be any changes to virtual learning, which is great. So our best advice at this time is to follow the guidance that's in the 1819 Pupil Accounting Manual, and or work with your ISD auditors.
Great. This kind of leads into this question. When it does come out, if there are new requirements, do they go into effect immediately or next school year?
Yeah, they do go into effect immediately, unless the legislator were to say, this doesn't go into effect until next school year. But they typically do that for very specific portions of the legislation. So I don't see that they would say, this entire bill package doesn't take effect until next year. It's likely going to go into effect immediately.
All right, we do have a question from the chat window. To clarify, can physical presence count as two-way interaction for count day as the two-way interaction?
So physical presence with either the mentor or teacher of record can be logged and used to meet 1 week of your two-way interaction. So I keep saying physical presence because we don't like to we don't want to confuse districts by saying attendance, because a mentor can't capture the attendance record, but a simple log of the student being present and is going to satisfy 1 week of the two-way.
Does this mean
Brian?
Brian? Brian, did you get that? Does this mean for all 4 weeks?
So you need, one log of physical attendance for each week, if that's what you're going to use.
And Kristen, Brian did talk a little bit earlier that he's talking about physical presence, and he did also say that you can text your students, you can talk to them face to face, you can email them. So there's other ways besides, if they don't come to your classroom every day, if you don't see them, there are other ways that you can complete that two-way interaction.
Right. Yep. And I would actually recommend for to all districts that they first start with trying to have the students complete one of their assignments for each course on count day, and then use two-way interactions as a backup if the students fail to do so. And this is just speaking to the membership requirement. Districts should be using two-way interactions, for their own edification about how the students are performing and doing in the classes throughout the entire school year.
Great, thank you. Our next question is about how does a mentor know they're recording their virtual learners correctly? And is there any training or additional resources for mentors in order to do that?
So the best way would be to contact the ISD auditor and say, is this going to work for you guys? There isn't training that's specific to mentors yet, but in speaking with Michigan Virtual, I think that we're going to try to collaborate on getting something put together for you folks later on.
Great, thanks. What advice do you have for a school that has lost FTE dollars due to incomplete or incorrect paperwork, which we know happens?
Yes, definitely. Well, speak to the ISD auditor. The other thing would be to use multiple forms of participation to ensure that you're going to have a backup plan if a student doesn't complete all their course assignments on count day. You have two-way interaction then to back that up. Also coach your students and before we get to count day, so that they know that they're going to have to communicate with the mentor minimally at least once a week about one of the classes on their schedule. So that would be the best advice. Get the students used to this as a practice, and document. That you're doing this every week.
All right. If a school does lose FTE dollars, can they appeal it? And if so, how do they do that?
Okay. Yeah, a district has 30 days after an audit to appeal that to the Office of Financial Management. And if after that appeal they're still unsatisfied with the result, they have 30 days to appeal it to the state superintendent.
All right. And are districts successfully meeting the reporting requirements for both electronic and hard copy submissions? Meaning, does it have to be one or the other? Are people still submitting hard copy? Do they have to get, if they want it submitted electronically, do they have to get permission from their auditor? How does that work?
So if you're going to do, or if you're going to document participation electronically, you're likely what we would refer to as a green auditing district. And this is something that the district and their ISD auditor have agreed to, and the details have been worked out more than likely a year in advance on what the district is, or the auditor is going to expect from the district as far as their electronic documentation. Hard copies are still probably the most common form of documenting the participation requirement. If you aren't a green site yet, and you are interested in using electronic documentation, I would simply reach out to the ISD auditor and say, hey, we would like to, instead of killing a bunch of trees, provide you with electronic copies of our participation records. Is that okay with you? And if so, what format would you like to see that in? And I think you're probably more than likely going to find that they're going to accept that approach.
Great. Well, getting back to the two-way communication requirement, can a mentor send a mass email like a Google form to all students as long as they still have the two-way interaction with them individually?
So yes, Jessica spoke to this earlier, and we do see mass communications being sent out. That is in itself doesn't count toward your two-way, but once you have the student, respond to that mass communication, and then the teacher follow up, individually to the student, then that completes the loop, and you have a two-way interaction. So you can use mass. You just have to make sure that it ends with both parties, speaking to each other.
Brian, I have another question in the chat here. Somebody asked, for physical attendance, mentors will not have to summarize the content of their interaction, just provide a log.
Well, you should have something to document that you had a conversation with the student, and they're progressing well in this, or they need a little bit of help. It doesn't need to be a paragraph of information, but it should be something to indicate that, yeah, you had a conversation with Brian, and he's doing fine in English, he's struggling a little bit in math. We're going to do XYZ to ensure that he gets back on track. So very simple, just a simple little summary of what what was said and how you're going to react.
Okay, and on that same note, someone said, to clarify, if the mentor in the lab is using attendance logs to satisfy two-way communication, that would be attendance any day during each week of the 4-week count period, correct? And will the new Pupil accounting manual include wording around using attendance in an academic seminar hour to count as two-way communication?
Well, so if you're using attendance, then it is going to be much like any other traditional environment. You're going to have the kid there on count day, and if they're not, they're scheduled to be there, but they are sick, then that student would be recorded as being absent, and they would have 10 days if the student's absence was unexcused to attend, or 30 days to attend if the absence was excused. So you're going to treat it, if this student is expected to be physically, in attendance with the teacher of record for at least 50% of the instructional time, you would treat it just like you would any other seated class.
Right, as we're winding down the questions here, we all know, and research shows, to be an effective mentor, you need to be regularly meeting with your students throughout the semester. But for count day purposes, if a student submits an assignment on count day, is that sufficient enough for reporting that virtual learner?
Yeah, this is submitting an assignment for each of the classes on count day is Route 2, and that is sufficient for meeting the membership requirement. Obviously, the best practice would be, even if you're not using two-way interactions for membership purposes, to still have them. We do understand that some kids require more interactions than others. But that's your tool, to ensure that these students are successful. And we would definitely want to see districts, having two-way, even if it's not, what they're using for membership purposes.
All right, Debbie, you want to talk a little bit about the additional resources available, and I'll have our chat window folks put these links in the chat window. Debbie?
You bet. I am going to add another resource when we're done here to this slide. We do have the Pupil Accounting Manual. This is last year's manual because, like Brian said, the new manual won't be out till probably the end of October. But you can look through that, and 50D is the section on virtual learners. I also, for anybody that is a mentor for Michigan Virtual students, I do have a Google site that has a lot of resources on it, including count day resources, and I have captured the part of the Pupil Accounting Manual that deals with just virtual learning. And also, Brian's made reference to, and I think a lot of mentors don't realize what a great resource that MPAAA is. And that's the Michigan Pupil Accounting Auditor Association. And they have a lot of resources on their website. And they have examples, like Brian has talked, in their manual at the back to show you what a two-way communication log looks like. I know people were asking on the chat what a two-way communication log looks like. And basically, and you can get that example from the Pupil Accounting Manual, and they're obviously on their website also. But basically, you just have to paraphrase the conversation you have with a student about the content of their course or the progress of the course. Like Brian said, it doesn't need to be something really long because the auditors have to read all that. They just want to make sure that you just didn't say, hey, how's your class going? And they say, great. And that's not good enough. You need to ask specific questions about, what are you struggling with? What can I do to help you? How's your class going? What are you struggling with? You don't have to know the exact content, but it needs to be something relevant to their course. And you just capture that on that two-way communication form for those 4-week count period. And that is what you will turn into your school district that they will ultimately upload to the state website. So, sorry, I will make sure that gets added. The MPAAA website gets added because Brian's referred to all the great resources they have on that site.
Great, thank you, Debbie. Just a reminder for those that may not know, the Michigan Virtual Learning Research Institute does provide many guides. There's a student guide to online learning, which is really aimed at middle and high school students thinking about taking virtual courses, and it really shares advice and recommendations about, from virtual instructors and mentors and virtual students. The parent guide is really important. Really, it's written for parents or guardians who are thinking about their students taking a virtual course, but it's also relevant for other adults as a school conversation about virtual learning, especially school counselors. It really helps in the decision-making process of whether a student is ready to take a virtual course. We have the Teacher Guide to Online Learning, which is really intended for those teaching online. And then the Mentor Fundamentals, which is one of the first ones that we put out, is super exciting because really that is everything a mentor needs to know, and the critical on-site support that we know and research shows is essential in students being successful online. And then we've recently just put out the School Board Guide to Online Learning, which is really to help in coordination with the Michigan Association of School Boards, but to help school boards get more acquainted with online learning and best practices. So you can find that at mbari.org/guides. And I do want to open it up now to, again, either questions in the chat window from our team who's monitoring that, or folks that just want to ask maybe a more specific question, raise their hand of a question that may or may not have been answered today.
Looks like Brian and Jessica did a great job today.
Great. Thank you for answering all of our questions. We really appreciate and thank you for taking time out today. It looks like we do have a question from Sean. So Sean is raising his hand, and we will let Sean ask his question.
He doesn't have a mic.
Oh.
He's asking, what report can I use for documentation for attendance?
Report for documentation for attendance.
Use the log that MPAAA provides as an example. It actually has physical presence as an option for the type of two-way that occurred. So take a look at that form. I think you'll see that it's pretty easy to use. Should be a pretty efficient way for you to capture and report your two-way.
Great, thank you. Well, again, if you have other questions, we will be sending out the recording of this webinar today, along with those links to resources that Debbie mentioned, and we will send Brian and Jessica's contact information along with Debbie. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any one of them. We wish you all the best of luck in your school year, and if you have any inkling to look at any additional webinars that Michigan Virtual has led and facilitated with experts from around the state, feel free to go to michiganvirtual.org/webinars. Thanks for being a part of it today. We'll see you at the next webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks.